BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And in this episode, as you can see from the title, I will be looking at a new forensic technique that can be used to solve older cold cases, as well as responding to pieces of true crime news, and of course looking at your questions and comments. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. So firstly, I would like to say that there is a new set of videos that is available on the channel SoCal Phantoms, F-A-N-T-H-U-M-B-S, SoCal Phantoms, and these are all about the Zodiac Killer and some numerical clues that could be found in the Zodiac's writings. There's also a video that is on the channel Crime Chronicles HQ called Zodiac Killer, Decoding the Killer, New Evidence Uncovered. And this is one that, of course, got my attention, but unfortunately there was no new evidence that was discussed in this video. Instead, they were simply talking about the Zodiac Killer suspect, Gary Francis Post, at the end, one who has been on the radar for years. And of course, there are lots of Zodiac videos over on the Nancy Drew channel. One of the more recent ones that came out was called Most of the Zodiacs, the Zodiac Killer Case. And I thought that this was going to be a very brief rundown or nutshell version of each major Zodiac Killer suspect. But instead, what this one does is that it compares the Zodiac suspects to the composite sketches and also has some types of biographic information, as well as just revealing off some things about their height and weight. But that is available on the Nancy Drew channel under the title Most of the Zodiacs, and it's good for a reference, if anything. And I would also like to remind you guys that today's episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If the Zodiac case fascinates you, be sure to check out the Zodiac Revisited. It's a deep dive into the mystery with a unique and interesting perspective. The trilogy is available on Amazon, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite true crime books. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping out Michael by leaving a 5-star review. And as you can see, though, from the title, I'm not going to keep you guys waiting anymore, and I'm just going to get to the point about this new forensic technique. I've been corresponding with an individual named Richard Patterson. He is a researcher who is perhaps more well known for the Jack the Ripper case. He has a book out there called Jack the Ripper, The Works of Francis Thompson, which, of course, looks at his own Jack the Ripper suspect. And I've also interviewed Richard Patterson as well as discussed his book on the program, and I've done several other episodes about his Ripper suspect, Francis Thompson, looking at different sources, particularly Simon Webb's book. But he has also explored the world of forensic science in just an overall attempt to solve numerous cold cases. Richard Patterson created a software program that is called FICA, or FSCA. And FICA stands for Function, Symbol, Code, and Anchor. Now, this software program mostly takes information about the most widely discussed suspects, and it analyzes them to try and determine the likelihood of this person actually being the killer. Richard did this first for the Jack the Ripper case, but because he follows Zodiac Monday, he thought I might also want to hear it about the Zodiac Killer mystery, and I was like, absolutely yes. So this software program, FICA, FSCA, can rank the Zodiac suspects in terms of who could have most likely have been the Zodiac Killer based on a set of accumulated pieces of information. Firstly, what do these things mean? Function, symbol, code, and anchor. And yes, I did get Richard's permission for sharing all of this on BBOR, but most of this is unpublished right now. Function is The Zodiac is a symbolic killer who sends messages. He seeks recognition, immortality, and he seeks intellectual domination. He targeted couples, isolated individuals in lovers' lanes or secluded areas, solitude, and the exception of the Paul Stein murder. Symbol means a signature symbol was used by the Zodiac, crosshairs, astrological references, engages with the public, author engages with the public as a ghost of fear, plays the role of the mythical Hermes or a trickster merged with a Hades archetype. That's really interesting stuff. Code, cipher letters, blends military cryptographic and theatrical grammar, deliberate spelling distortions, encrypted self-concealment, and communicative sadism. I think that all of these things are spot on, by the way. I mean, we could do like a breakdown on all of them, and, why don't we do that in just a second, but first, let's go to the anchor. The anchor is likely a male, 25 to 45, in 1969, meaning that he was born between 1924 and 1944, educated and typically trained in cryptography or engineering, a resentful outsider with narcissistic compensations, resided in or near Vallejo, Benicia, or Riverside at multiple times, and during multiple crime periods. So as far as this thing, the function part of this, F, this is somebody who is symbolic. Yes, the Zodiac is a very symbolic killer because he is doing things with attaching symbols to it, and he's also saying that he is doing this for some type of metaphorical reason. By metaphorical reason, I mean that he has his own belief system, and he seeks recognition. Yes, of course, the Zodiac sought recognition. If you don't publish this in the paper, then I will do my thing, something nasty, which I'm capable of. If you don't publish this, I'll go on a kill rampage. The Zodiac is all about getting recognition, targets couples, with the exception of Paul Stein. Yes, this stuff is spot on. With the symbol, signature symbols, yes, astrological references. Some people might not immediately think that the Zodiac Killer was using astrological references, but the fact that he is called the Zodiac and he uses the Zodiac sign, those are indeed astrological. He engages with the public as a ghost author of fear. Yes, that's what the Zodiac is doing. He's not using his real name. And in the first letter, he doesn't even say the Zodiac. He doesn't say this is the Zodiac speaking. I agree, he's a ghost author. Now plays the mythic role of Hermes or a trickster merged with Hades. I'll just give Richard that one, I'll trust him on that. As far as the code, cipher letters blending military, cryptographic, and theatrical grammar. Yes, the Zodiac made numerous theatrical references, particularly to The Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan, and he could have learned about the ciphers in the military. Deliberate spelling distortions. Now, I think that almost everybody believes that some of the Zodiac's misspellings were intentional, and I'm going to be talking more about some other videos later on in the program, and this comes up time and time again. In the Zodiac's very first letter, he misspelled the word Christmas with 2 S's, and they're like, even if you had just some mild familiarity with that word, you could probably spell Christmas. The Zodiac misspelled the word kid, spelling it C-I-D. Some of them are most likely intentional. And the anchor, male, 25 to 45, most likely born between 1924 and 1944. Well, we're going to come back to that one later on, because there are some things that I do want to challenge about that. But you guys might just be wondering, well, how does this tie into the widely discussed suspects out there? And part of me wanted to introduce this backwards, start at the bottom, and then work our way to the top. But you guys already know who the widely discussed Zodiac suspects are, and then there wouldn't really be any surprise. So we're going to start from the top. Again, this is putting in a person's name into this software program, FCSA, and then it's going to try and turn it into a suspect profile and determine the likelihood of this person to have been the Zodiac Killer. Out of all the widely discussed Zodiac Killer suspects, the number 1 result was Richard Gaikowski. And I am not joking. Richard Gaikowski, trained in radio communications, lived in California near the Zodiac sites, and it was reported that his voice matched a phone call. He was the editor of a counterculture newspaper, which should also be thought of as a symbol carrier. That's why this comes up on the search results. He used pen names and lived dual lives, and the Zodiac Killer also used pen names and lived a dual life. He possibly knew the victim, Darlene Ferrin. This FSCA score is the highest, and that is an 88 or 8.8 out of 10, 88%. All right, I mean, that really is something that, stands out. But you might be wondering, well, how close are the other Zodiac Killer suspects? And a lot of you are probably wondering, how does this software program rank a suspect like Arthur Lee Allen? Arthur Lee Allen is the most widely discussed Zodiac Killer suspect. He's the prime suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and his FICA score, or FSCA, is 76, so a full 12 points lower than Richard Gaikowski. Arthur Lee Allen wore a Zodiac watch with the crosshair logo. He had an alleged fixation on ciphers and domination, owned the same type of typewriter as the Zodiac. Well, we can come back to that later on. Lived near crime scenes and was fired from a school. And the polygraph was inconclusive, and there was a DNA mismatch, yet circumstantial trail was strong. But even though Arthur Lee Allen does have those things, and he talks about the circumstantial case that is reasonably strong, when I did my own suspect ratings for Black Box Online Radio, I gave both Arthur Lee Allen and Richard Gaikowski a 5 out of 10. In fact, one of the reasons, maybe even the biggest reason, why I started making Zodiac videos on YouTube was I didn't like the prime suspects in the Zodiac Killer mystery. I was looking at suspects like Richard Gaikowski and Arthur Lee Allen and just thinking, I'm not seeing it. I'm just not seeing it. I think all of the explanations are very generic. I didn't find them to be extremely in line with the physical descriptions, although I think Geik would match the physical descriptions more so than Allen. But overall, though, I just wasn't seeing it. But this is not what I think. This is the info that came from the computer program, and it states that Geik is an 88%, or 8.8 out of 10. Arthur Lee Allen is a 76%, or 7.6 out of 10. The next suspect that was ranked is Gary Francis Post. And Gary Francis Post got a 61, or 6.1 out of 10, and that's his FICA score. And Gary Francis Post was claimed by the case breakers. He has a military background. He lived in California near the Zodiac areas, and anagrams of his name allegedly fit into the cipher, and scars reportedly match the composite sketch. So you see, if Geik is the strongest suspect at 88%, Gary Francis Post is a full 27 points lower than Richard Gaikowski. And overall, though, there was a suspect that I requested specifically for Richard to run into his program, and it's one that a lot of you might be curious about, and his name is Donald Lee Cheney, and this is going to be his FICA results. And FICA, of course, is function, symbol, code, and anchor, but it can also stand for Forensic Symbolic Convergence Analysis. And the overall FICA score for Donald Lee Cheney is 78, or 7.8 out of 10. Donald Lee Cheney is a higher ranked suspect than Arthur Lee Allen, and I would just love to know, how do you guys respond to that? How do you guys respond to any of this? You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. Richard Gaikowski gets an 88, Arthur Lee Allen gets a 76, Gary Post gets a 61, and Don Cheney gets a 78. That was his Forensic Symbolic Convergence Analysis score, also function, symbol, code, and anchor. The core alignments with Don Cheney, symbolic, as control imposed. Cheney demonstrates a psychological need to manipulate perception through the narrative, seen in the self-initiated confession-like Zodiac theory, where he implicated a friend named Arthur Lee Allen. This is all from the program, mind you. This is a redirection, and it's a classic projection deflection trait aligned with the Zodiac's taunting letters. Technical literacy, mechanical affinity. Don Cheney had documented experience as an engineer, aerospace and mechanical fields, with knowledge of cryptographic systems, construction, mirrors, and Zodiac-coded messages. I guess that means that his knowledge of cryptographic systems and construction mirrors the Zodiac's coded messages, schematic style diagrams, and awareness of complex ciphers. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Don Cheney was in the Air Force, and he could have learned about all of that stuff in the military, and he was also a mechanical engineer. Performance through distance. Cheney repeatedly inserts himself into the Zodiac mythos, but not as a suspect, but as a dramatic narrator, mirroring the Zodiac's own desire to orchestrate chaos while staying distant and above suspicion. Geolocation match. Don Cheney lived and worked in the areas proximate to multiple Zodiac attacks during the key window of 1966 to 1971. This includes professional mobility, access to transport, and matching the Zodiac's varied crime scenes and evasive movements. Well, there is some truth to that, but Don Cheney did leave the Bay Area after the Lake Herman Road murders in 1968, and he could have come back to the Bay Area for things like hunting trips, or that is what Drew Beeson, who wrote the book about him, citing in on the Zodiac Killer, hypothesizes that that would have been something that he could have done to get back into the Bay Area to commit the murders, and maybe he had an assistant or a patsy or a duper fool mailing the letters for him. And then Don Cheney also has projection through moral framing. His interviews show an uncanny tendency to describe the Zodiac in morally dramatized terms that reflect Don Cheney's own inner structure, including references to punishment, righteousness, and controlled madness. Now, these are going to be some divergences from the Zodiac. Number 1. Don Cheney has a lack of documented sadistic history. No known history of cruelty, animal abuse, or sexual violence on record, which weakens alignment with the Zodiac's implied sadistic tendencies. And I was going to read through all of these and then just go through them like I did with the last group, but I do have to stop right there. Lack of documented sadistic history. Now, what kind of killer are we looking for? I think we're looking for a killer that has never been identified. So, just because someone doesn't have a documented history of sadistic tendencies does not mean that they don't. And, I mean, that's the whole point. People don't know that this person was a killer, right? No known history of cruelty, animal abuse, or sexual violence on record. Well, as far as sexual violence goes, the Zodiac Killer did not commit sexually violent crimes. The Zodiac didn't commit sexual assaults of any of the victims in the confirmed crimes. And, there's one blanket statement that somebody threw out in the comments section, and that was that anytime somebody is trying to say that the Zodiac was a rapist, then it's most likely not a Zodiac crime. When there are these very sexual murders that took place where a victim has been sexually assaulted, just that wasn't the Zodiac Killer. And overall, I mostly agree with it. I don't want to throw out just an entirely blanket statement that it's impossible, but I do think that it's improbable. Now, did the Zodiac have sadistic tendencies? Absolutely. Absolutely. The Zodiac is all about driving fear into the heart of the victims. The second point on the list, these are challenges against Don Cheney as a Zodiac suspect. Public transparency. Cheney willingly came forward multiple times seeking to inform or implicate others. This contrasts with the Zodiac's obsession with anonymity and control. Well, I'm 50-50 on this one. And I don't mean like I'm on the fence. I mean, I see 50% of the argument and the interpretation of the evidence, and 50% of a challenge. Yes, the Zodiac is all about himself. I, right? That was one of the ways that Don and Betty Hardin were able to solve the 408 cipher. They thought, this guy is so full of himself, maybe the first letter in the 408 cipher is I. And it was, I like killing. So Don Cheney is definitely blaming somebody else. He's definitely trying to implicate Arthur Lee Allen. That means the focus isn't on him. But this also, the 50% that I am disagreeing with this is that Don Cheney would also be doing something called hiding in plain sight. And there are multiple examples of serial killers that hide in plain sight because it's a way for them to also think that they are superior in some ways. And the example that I always go back to is when I did the episode on William Suff, who was the Riverside Killer, also known as the Lake Elsinore Killer, and he even bought lunch for the task force that was trying to catch him once, because he's just trying to stay close to the investigation, but not get so close that he would actually be caught. And this is a little bit different with Don Cheney because he's not just talking to people in law enforcement, he is blaming somebody else for the crimes. So I'm really 50% on that one. And the third one is absence of direct threat behavior. No record of Don Cheney issuing threats, hoaxes, or violent behavior, traits that the Zodiac repeatedly performed through mail and murder. I mean, I think that that's all covered in my first statement that we're looking for an unidentified serial killer. That means that people don't know that this guy was a serial killer, so then he's going to be able to hide it. Final assessment. Donald Lee Cheney exhibits a strong symbolic alignment with the Zodiac in areas of narrative control, technical background, persona management, and geographic access. I think the geographic access is the most questionable. His actions, particularly his creation of a Zodiac fantasy narrative, while deflecting suspicion, suggest a personality capable of constructing myth under the guise of truth. However, his lack of violent history and overt self-insertion lower his alignment. He gets a FICA score of 78 or 7.8 out of 10. And there are also some Zodiac Killer suspects that I have mentioned on the channel that I would like to talk to you guys about now. We've heard about Richard Gaikowski, Arthur Lee Allen, Gary Post, and Don Cheney. Gaikowski is the highest rated suspect, and no, there's no twist at the end that I'm going to reveal a higher rated suspect than that. Gaikowski was the highest rated suspect, 88% or 8.8 out of 10. Then we have Don Cheney at 78%, or 7.8 out of 10. Arthur Lee Allen at 76%, or 7.6 out of 10. Then Gary Post was 61%, or 6.1 out of 10. And there's a Zodiac Killer suspect that I haven't talked to you guys about in quite a while, and his name is Loring Dale Hill, L.D. Hill, and you can hear more about him in some of the interviews that I've done, and I have a standalone episode about him on this channel, and he gets a score of 7.2 out of 10, or 72%. And with Loring Dale Hill, trait convergence with Zodiac is moderate. Symbolic resonance is high. He has a military and aviation background. Known behavior, he was a former Air Force officer. I believe he was a naval officer, actually, with cryptographic training, reclusive tendencies, and he lived near the Zodiac activity scenes. He had strong Bay Area links, specific links to Vallejo. He had some convergence with military phrasing and rank-based hierarchy references. There are psychological indicators such as possible narcissistic traits, reported authoritarian streak, some manipulative control that was reported in a private setting, and ritualistic or symbolic actions. He was known for collecting symbolic paraphernalia, interests in codes, and hierarchies. And he gets a 7.2 out of 10, or 72%. And the last one that is on the list is named Shel Cavalli. Shel Cavalli was the suspect of Microdeli. He is the suspect of Microdeli. He is the subject of the book In the Shadow of Mount Diablo. Shel Cavalli is very different than a lot of the people on this list, as he was a millionaire, and I'm going to read this one off, but I told you, I mostly agreed with the program's assessment of the Zodiac Killer, saying this is the way the Zodiac operated. I told you even about the astrological connection. Yes, I do think that that's a fair thing to say about the Zodiac, but with Shel Cavalli, you're going to see some different things. Suspect Shel Cavalli. Trait convergence with the Zodiac is low. Symbolic resonance is minimal. He was a business elite, as I said, a millionaire. Lacks the Zodiac mythic style. Known behavior, he was prominent. He was a prominent businessman, social, visible. No known cryptographic or violent tendencies. Geographic overlap is weak. He had San Francisco ties, but no confirmed proximity to the attacks. Linguistic patterns were minimal linguistic correlations. His psychological background was pragmatic, a corporate mindset with no signs of obsessive or signature behaviors, and ritualistic or symbolic actions, no evidence of ritual or symbolic fixation. And Shel Cavalli will be the lowest ranked suspect on here. His FISCA score, FSCA, is 2.9 out of 10, or 29%. Now, even though I have not said that Shel Cavalli is my favorite suspect in the past, I've been very critical of Shel Cavalli as a Zodiac Killer suspect. When I did my own suspect ratings, I gave him a 4 out of 10, or 40%, so just a little bit higher than this program. But it's for completely different reasons. This is one where we might actually have to stand up to the computer, because I think that all of this information here is just completely wrong. So as far as he's a business elite and he lacks Zodiac's mythic style, well, there could be something that we don't know about, but I have to give the program that one. That he was a prominent businessman, social, visible, no known cryptographic or violent tendencies. Well, no known cryptographic knowledge. If we're going to say that these other people have possibly obtained cryptographic knowledge from the Navy, Shelkavale was a naval pilot. So how come you would say that it's acceptable for Arthur Lee Allen or L.D. Hill, but not for Shelkavale? So, I mean, he has that going for him. Geographic overlap is weak. I mean, I'm just reading this stuff off here. San Francisco ties, but no confirmed proximity to the attack zones. Now, this is just untrue. Shelkavale lived in Presidio Heights. He lived in Presidio Heights where one of the Zodiac Killer victims was murdered. And that's the whole theory about how he would have committed the murder of Paul Stein and then gone home. He might have taken his dog out, but he would have, that's the whole point, that he committed the murder of Paul Stein, then went back to his home in Presidio Heights by either running or walking. Mike Rodelli has actually stated that he believes that he would have made a quick jog home, for some paraphrasing terms, but absolutely Shelkavale had proximity to one of the attack zones, and I don't think any of the Zodiac Killer suspects would have proximity to all the attack zones unless you're really, really going to start messing around with the geography and just say that anything in Northern California is close to an attack zone, but I disagree with that. Shelkavale lived in Presidio Heights. Now, as far as minimal linguistic correlation, well, let's see. Maybe if we accept something like the SL ley letter as being authentic, and I think there's a very high chance that it is, the SL ley letter is the one that says an Old Norse word meaning kill. Shelkavale was Norwegian, born in Norway, lived until he was 10 years old in Norway, and Mike Rodelli states that he was even familiar with Old Norse. He stated that here in the comments section on Black Box Online Radio. So, I mean, that's a possibility. But this other thing here, though, pragmatic corporate mindset, no signs of obsession or signature behaviors, no signs of obsession? Well, what do you mean by an obsession? That he's obsessed with something? Like, what kind of obsession are you talking about? Shelkavale was obsessed with speed. He was obsessed with racing, horse racing, boat racing, auto racing. He worked in the automotive business. I mean, he was, how about running, unofficially tying the world record for the 100-meter dash? He is involved in so many different types of racing. I openly call him a speed junkie on this channel. No signature behaviors. Now, this is something that I haven't encountered in a while, but one of the very first things that I've ever read about Shelkavale was that he had a signature behavior. This was back in 2020 when I did my first 2 episodes about him, and I was just like, I mean, this is one of the first sentences that I ever encountered, and that was that his signature behavior was writing his name on the car door, because he was, again, an import-export individual in the automotive trade. He brought Volkswagens to the West Coast, and his signature move was to write his name on the car door for publicity, and the Zodiac, of course, wrote a message on the car door at Lake Berryessa. So with a lot of these suspect things, I can agree with the facts. You know, they're saying, oh, Geik was a member of a counterculture newspaper. Yes, he was. It was called The Good Times. With Arthur Lee Allen, they're saying that, you know, he had problems getting fired from jobs. Okay, well, all of that is true. But Shelkavale didn't live near any of the crime scenes. I disagree with that completely. Or how about also saying that he had no obsessions and no signature moves? I also disagree with those things completely. He definitely did. But yes, he is the lowest ranked suspect by the program, and this is the FSCA FICA program, created by Richard Patterson, one more time the author of Jack the Ripper, the works of Francis Thompson. And to all of you who follow the Ripper Wednesday show, yes, he has done this for Jack the Ripper as well. And I mean, I really just want to thank Richard Patterson for sharing all of that material, as well as, you know, sharing his own original creations for Black Box Online Radio and Zodiac Monday. A very brief recap of the suspects discussed. Richard Gaikowski, 88%. Don Cheney, 78%. Arthur Lee Allen, 76%. Loring Dale Hill, 72%. Gary Post, 61%. Shelkavale, 29%. Please weigh in the comments section down below. What do you think? And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shoutout on Zodiac Monday. And our first shoutout comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the shorts that come out Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio. The short episodes mostly talk about serial killers, true crime news, but anything under the sun or in the darkness is fair game. They were released on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok, but unfortunately, Black Box Online Radio has now been banned from TikTok. I was trying to log into the account the other day, and it turned out that I had just been kicked out completely. I had received 2 ban warnings over the last 6 months, as I said, for just talking about serial killers and true crime news. You guys can see all of the shorts that are available here on YouTube. And I've, interacted with some of you guys in the posts that I made in the community section, but just making the announcement that Black Box Online Radio is no longer available on TikTok. How will the world continue? And I know that 95% of you listening to this right now don't even use TikTok. I did not use TikTok for anything else, unless a Zodiac Killer video came up. There is a woman who is claiming that she's going to solve the Z32 cipher on TikTok, and the reason why I'm not doing a bigger special about that now is because she has not revealed her solution yet, but she says that she'll do it in the near future. Unfortunately, Black Box Online Radio won't be able to respond to her directly via TikTok message or whatever they call it over there, but, we will always keep her in our thoughts. Thank you once again, though, Batman66, for the coffee, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and our next supporter is River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, thank you also for your regular and consistent support. Greatly appreciated. And of course, we have CZ Guy, another regular and consistent supporter. And you three have just been absolutely amazing, and thank you so much for supporting Black Box Online Radio, supporting shows like Zodiac Monday, Ripper Wednesday, and Cooper Friday. And tomorrow there will be another episode about the story of JonBenet Ramsey here on Black Box Online Radio. And this week there will also be another bonus episode about the Zodiac Killer coming out on Thursday. The reason why I've been doing the episodes this way is I realized that there were some episodes from my JonBenet series that I did not get to make yet, and I'm like, you know what? There's no time like the present. I'm going to do it for the Tuesday show. And the same is true of the Zodiac Killer. There were some suspects that I had never talked about before, such as Paul Doer, or let me rephrase. I never gave them an individual suspect profile episode, so I made the Paul Doer episode. I redid the book discussion on One Night in October by Gerald Gregory Doan, which to this day is still one of the best true crime books that I've read in the last 12 months, period. And, they're just different things that I wanted to explore in these unsolved mysteries. But next week, if all goes well, this should be the launch of the new Black Dahlia series that is going to be coming out here on Black Box Online Radio. And I've only very loosely looked at the Black Dahlia murder. I've made an episode here or there over the last 8 years, but I've definitely not done a deep dive into that mystery. And even though it's a terrible, terrible story, I am looking forward to it. But thank you to you three so much. And our next supporter is C.G. Karras. Carl Karras, thank you so much for that as well. C.G. Karras is the author of the book, The Zodiac, Murderers and Histories, Ciphers and Crimes, and I have interviewed him for this program. I've also done a book discussion about his writings. So I thank you so much for supporting Black Box Online Radio as well. And I would like to give a shout out to Dennis G. Dennis G did not make a financial contribution, but Dennis G helps find a lot of the images that you see going by here on the screen, and Dennis G has also been just doing a lot of background things for Black Box Online Radio, so much appreciated. And we can even give one to Chad Burke, who runs the Search for the Zodiac Facebook group, and Chad Burke was the one who made the thumbnail for this episode, one that he posted in his Facebook group, The Search for the Zodiac, and that is one where there are going to be numerous possible solutions to the Zodiac's Z13 cipher. And Chad is always working hard trying to solve that one. Now, there's a book that came out recently about, 2 months ago, and it was written by Michael Butterfield called The Zodiac Killer, the story of America's most elusive murderer. And I was focused on some other things, but I finally decided to just sit down and go through some more chapters in Michael Butterfield's book, and I'm hoping to work some more of it into Black Box Online Radio. And Michael Butterfield's book wants to look at the Zodiac Killer case, and it wants to tell the story, but it also wants to clarify some popular beliefs that people might have about the case. And that is, let's look at the Zodiac Killer's second confirmed crime, the Blue Rock Spring shooting, which saw the deaths, the death of Darlene Ferrin and the shooting of Mike Mageau. Now, many people will know that Darlene Ferrin reportedly had a stalker, or somebody was coming into the restaurant where she worked as a server and harassing her, bothering her. And some people think that this was Lawrence Kane. Other people, like Lyndon Lafferty, propose that it was his suspect, William Joseph Grant. Some people think that it was Arthur Lee Allen. But in the police reports, there is an individual that is discussed named George Waters. And I'm pretty sure that's who Michael Butterfield is referring to. He simply calls him George in the book. But George Waters was the person who was identified as being this person who was harassing Darlene Ferrin. But Michael Butterfield goes into a little bit more detail in the book about how he was actually really trying to break into her life. In fact, I'll just read the segment for you now. George met Darlene at Terry's in January of 1969, and he later bought a truck from Dean Ferrin, Darlene's husband. He was married, but he repeatedly asked Darlene to go out with him. She refused, and restaurant employees said he was very emotional when Darlene did not pay attention to him. Darlene reportedly told her friend, Stephen Mageau, that George had broken into her apartment and tried to rape her, but she convinced him to leave. That's what I mean about this is not just harassing somebody in the restaurant. If someone's breaking into the apartment and trying to commit a crime like that, definitely more serious. Stephen Mageau had a twin brother named Michael Mageau, and they were both born on October 29th of 1949. They lived together until their parents divorced, and then Stephen moved to Los Angeles to live with the mother, while Michael moved to Vallejo to live with the father. Michael, of course, was the victim that was sitting next to Darlene Ferrin when she was murdered. And another point, though, that was discussed in the book during the Blue Rock Springs chapter is that when Darlene Ferrin was shot by the Zodiac Killer, she was wearing what is frequently described as a slack dress. It had a floral pattern on it, and a slack dress is a one-piece jumpsuit type dress, but Michael Butterfield actually says that that's incorrect in the book, that she wasn't even wearing a slack dress. He actually states that it was a tank top jumpsuit that the authorities wrote down as slack dress. And I don't know if this is the most important detail, but it's something that he wanted to pay attention to in his book because it might be the most important. Allow me to clarify. Some people might not think that that's the most important detail, but it could be eye-opening because the slack dress becomes a foundational part of the hoax theory, which is promoted by Thomas Henry Horn. When the Zodiac wrote his letter talking about the facts that only he and the police knew, he didn't say that the victim was wearing a tank top dress or a slack dress or tank top jumpsuit. He said that the girl was wearing patterned slacks. And what he believes is that somebody read the police report and they saw a slack dress written down. They didn't know what a slack dress was, so they decided to, their brain connected that as dress slacks, and that's why the Zodiac said that she was wearing patterned slacks. It's really interesting that Michael Butterfield notes that she wasn't even wearing a slack dress. It was a tank top jumpsuit, and I think I can visualize what he is talking about compared to the other photos of slack dresses, which look much puffier, and they have just more arm length with the fabric and materials, so to speak. But I totally confess I am not an expert on these types of 1960s fashion trends. Now, some of you guys have brought something else to my attention, and there was the channel out there called Friday Beers that had made their video where they drink 12 beers and they talk about true crime cases and unsolved mysteries. And I told you that I tried to watch their video, but I fell asleep the first time. So I decided to give it another go. And yes, they are going to drink 12 beers while they're talking about the Zodiac. There is a host who is sober during the introductory phases, providing them with the suspects, and then they had two other guys who were each drinking 12 beers. They're just chugging them down, though. It's not like a casual true crime brewery episode. Like, there were these channels that were very popular, or even just widely shared years ago. True Crime Brewery was another one. True Crime Wine Time was another, where people are just slowly, sipping things, and they're not even really using the alcohol as part of their gimmick. It's just something that they put in the title of their episode. But with this episode, Friday Beers, it's definitely a big focus for their channel and their episodes. And by the end of it, yes, they were very drunk. Now, I want to share something with you guys that I think is rather important to discuss. And that is that you could see from this episode how two newcomers were going to look at the Zodiac Killer mystery and how they would begin to think. Firstly, you had one guy, and again, these are just the two beer drinkers. One guy was just absolutely just Arthur Lee Allen. From the beginning, he's like, Arthur Lee Allen. Oh, what? There was the witness named Mike Michaud said, that's the man who shot me? Oh, Arthur Lee Allen. Oh, this guy lived in Vallejo, Arthur Lee Allen. Oh, he got fired from his job. He would sing the Mikado. The Zodiac used the Mikado lyrics and letters. Arthur Lee Allen. The whole time, he's like, Arthur Lee Allen. He may have considered other suspects, but he was saying Arthur Lee Allen. With the other guy, he began to pattern seek in a different way. I've told you at least once during this episode that in the Zodiac Killer's very first letter, he says that he's responsible for the murder of two teenagers last Christmas, but Christmas is spelled with two S's at the end. And the other guy's just sitting back and thinking, SS, could that be a nod to the SS, like the Nazis, what he called the gazpacho? And then they, of course, start laughing at him, thinking that the gazpacho were the SS, gazpacho, tomato soup served ice cold. And they were even talking about the Gestapo for a while. But, I mean, that's the one thing that he zones in on. Then he sees the Lake Berryessa costume, specifically the forensic sketch of the Lake Berryessa costume with the measurements drawn out, and he's like, oh my goodness, that looks like a Ku Klux Klan hood. So he has SS, Nazis, Ku Klux Klan. One guy was all about Arthur Lee Allen, and the other one is just pulling things out of the Zodiac's lore, for lack of a better term, and building his own narrative on how this guy was a right-wing, white supremacist, Nazi. He's zoning in on all of those things, but he's only focused on these very specific elements of the Zodiac Killer's creations. So I'm just sitting back and thinking, you can really see the thought processes played out where somebody is like, prime suspect, it has to be this guy, look at this mountain of evidence in front of him, and the other guy is just thinking about things in a different way. He is pattern seeking in his own manner, which is completely different. But, I mean, to be honest with you, I think both methods were purely impractical. And they also were saying some things that I found to be a little bit odd during this episode, where they're talking about, the Zodiac Killer. And they did this type of reenactment of the Blue Rock Springs shooting, where again, they have three guys. So the two guys that are drinking beer and talking about the Zodiac were pretending to be Darlene Ferrin and Mike Michaud, and they moved into some type of intimate setting where they thought that her legs would have been across his when she would have been shot by the Zodiac, like her legs would be sitting on Mike Michaud's lap. And I was really quite curious why they would do something like that. It was most likely just done by their own assumption. Everything else that I've seen about Darlene Ferrin is that she was sitting in the driver's seat, and it's quite possible that when the Zodiac shot at her, her hands were on the steering wheel, and she didn't have her legs on top of Mike Michaud, but that's what they put in their video. And there were some other things, though, that they began to discuss when they're looking at the suspects. And one of them was Earl Van Best Jr., and the beer drinkers really did not like Earl Van Best as a Zodiac Killer suspect. One of them, though, the guy who was pushing the Nazi angle, was saying, hey, this Earl Van Best, he looks just like the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch. And the other one put his hand over the glasses, and he's like, no, he doesn't. It's just the glasses. And I think that that's really, well, it's interesting because that was my experience. And I know matching a Zodiac suspect to the composite sketch is not the perfect way to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery. It might not even be a beneficial way for the Zodiac Killer case to be explored. However, that when you look at a suspect like Earl Van Best, I said for years that he did not match the composite sketch. I said for years, I'm not seeing it. And I think a big reason is the hairline. Because what that guy is trying to do is he's putting his hand over Earl Van Best's glasses, and he's like, when you look at the face shape and the hairline, he doesn't match the composite sketch. But of course, to the people who still think that Earl Van Best could have been the Zodiac Killer, he would have had to have had a different haircut. They didn't mention anything about Gary Stewart's fraudulent behavior in that one, but that's ultimately what I think was distracting the guy. Yes, with a different haircut, Earl Van Best would resemble a composite sketch more closely. And one more time, that was from the channel Friday Beers. And I would like to conclude this episode of Zodiac Monday with the comment of the week. The comment of the week is something that I started doing where I give out an award to one of you guys for just sharing something that catches my attention in the comments section, and this can be done on any of the episodes, Zodiac Monday, Ripper Wednesday, Cooper Friday, or on the new Jean Bonnet segment. And for the first time ever, we have a 2-time award winner for the comment of the week. And this one comes to us from N0, who says, "What are your thoughts on the Zodiac killing on specific days and times?" And again, this is just something that caught my attention. N0, you win the award for the comment of the week. What are your thoughts on the Zodiac killing on specific days and times? Because this is something that I think we need to address. In the past, I've been horribly skeptical. For a while, I had my own mathematical set of creations. I think that the holiday thing is a little bit overblown. Like everybody's talking about how the first Zodiac crime was on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders. Now, the Zodiac referred to that as last Christmas, that is around Christmas time, but it's not on Christmas, it's not on Christmas Eve, and it's not on New Year's even. So he's saying last Christmas, it's not directly on a holiday. Then we have the second crime, the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Now that one is on a holiday, but that's really the only one that fits perfectly like a glove. And then we have the Lake Berryessa stabbing, September 27th. It's close to other things, like even the summer solstice, or not summer solstice, fall equinox, the end of the summer and the fall equinox, September 21st. And then, of course, October 11th could be close to Columbus Day. But I think that that's too much of a reach in my own opinion. And to the longtime followers of Black Box Online Radio, you guys will know that I was pushing one original observation for a while, that when you have the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and the Lake Berryessa stabbing, those dates can be put on the car door at Lake Berryessa by the Zodiac. They were put on the car door at Lake Berryessa by the Zodiac, and it says 12/20/68. That totals up to 100. And then you have 7/4/69 for the Blue Rock Springs shooting. That totals up to 80, 180. Very nice, even numbers. And then you have the Stein murder, which was not written on the car door at Lake Berryessa, but that's 10/11/69, and that totals up to 90. So, I mean, this stuff all came out very neatly. The only one that wasn't was the Lake Berryessa stabbing, but the Zodiac altered his words, and he didn't write the numbers. He didn't write the number 7 for the Lake Berryessa stabbing, or the number 9 actually. He wrote the word September, S-E-P-T, and then if you total up that thing, excuse me for saying 7, set is the French word for 7, but when you total it up using the different method, then it comes out to 40. So all of these things came out very, very neatly. 100, 90, 80, 40. If it was 100, 90, 80, 70, I would be just like slapping my whole identity on that, saying, look at what he's doing. He's doing some type of mathematical countdown. But it doesn't work out perfectly. And, that could be something as simple as just another mathematical coincidence. Although I am really, really captivated by how neatly it works out like that. But as far as the Zodiac actually doing, like if we're going to talk about what the Zodiac was specifically thinking, to give the most honest answer, I think that he was doing this because of convenience. The Lake Herman Road murders might have been a rage killing. He may have been mad about something else, and he committed the Lake Herman Road murders as a type of retaliation, not against David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, but he killed them because He was mad and he decided to export his destructive tendencies. And then for 7 months, he's just thinking about it over and over again. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that. Maybe he was even relocated to a different part of the country for work or the military or some other relationship reason. Then he's just thinking about it. Can I do it again? Can I get away with it again? Then he commits the Blue Rock Springs shooting because everybody was out celebrating the 4th of July. And to the credit of Thomas Henry Horn, one of his observations about the Blue Rock Springs shooting was so many people would have been down watching the boat parade. Not a lot of people would have been in Blue Rock Springs Park. Darlene Ferrin and Mike Michaud went there because it was secluded. So he's doing this because of convenience. And this might be an unpopular opinion, but I don't think highly of this whole holiday connection and the dates and time connection. Like, is the Zodiac specifically choosing dates and times because they had some real significance to him? I went over it so many times, like thinking about how the Zodiac could have been choosing these dates for some type of specific reason. Maybe yes, maybe no. If we look at Mike Rodelli's book, In the Shadow of Mount Diablo, his ebook was called The Hunt for Zodiac. He said something completely different, though. His suspect, Shulka Vale, had dates that matched up to the Lake Herman Road murders and the Lake Berryessa stabbing. One's the birth date of one of his parents and the death date of another one of his parents. That could be something, if it turns out that his suspect is there. So my ultimate conclusion is, a lot of these things about the dates and times are suspect relative. If we actually identify the Zodiac, it might make a little bit more sense. But as of now, I have not seen anything convincing that actually shows us that, okay, this is why the Zodiac was committing murders on these dates. So that tells me that this isn't even about the holiday connection. This is about committing crimes because of convenience. And with the Stein murder, the murder of Paul Stein, I think there was a certain element of calculation that went into that crime, but the calculation related to his exit strategy out of Presidio Heights. And the guys on the Friday Beers channel said something completely different. They were like, if this guy were a holiday killer, why wouldn't he call himself the Holiday Killer? And wait for it, I do think that this is an amazing point. The Holiday Killer would be more terrifying than the Zodiac. Yes, absolutely, I agree. Because if the killer only operates on holidays, then he doesn't have to operate on every single holiday. And then people would be thinking, oh no, it's President's Day. Maybe the killer's going to strike. Then he doesn't strike on President's Day, he strikes on Easter. It's just something like that where 4 times a year the holiday killer would come out and get people. I agree, that would be more terrifying and horrific if you're just trying to spread the image of terror. So credit to the Friday Beers channel, which once again is a true crime comedy channel, but that's a really interesting observation. But anyway, great question, N0. You get the award for the comment of the week. And that will be all for me now. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Zodiac Monday. And the Zodiac Killer News Report is back in full swing. As many of you noticed, I was doing some things like book discussions and suspect profiles and interviews. But now we are back in the swing with the Zodiac Killer News Report. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and there's also a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, which I'm hoping to use more over the course of the next year. And there is blackboxned88 on Instagram and TikTok. Ha 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 ha. Just kidding. There's no more blackboxned88 on TikTok. I got banned for talking about serial killers. What a crazy world we live in. But anyway, blackboxned88 on Instagram is still there, and I will see you guys over there. That's all for me now. Goodbye.